Hey guys, I love having a roaming mic to use so I can see you better. And I suppose there's a few subjects that we want to address today. And number one is why are we talking about resilience in the first place? Why not say just successful career? And the reason being is because we've noticed a few resilience gaps. First of all, within our supply chains post-COVID. And resilience is all about our ability to adapt to the ups and downs, the twists and turns. And COVID really did challenge supply chains and show just how brittle they actually were. We also have resilience gaps within the medical device sector because we're all about trying to achieve good patient outcomes. But the same medical device can actually achieve quite good or bad outcomes depending on the resource setting of the country or the context that it's used in. And finally, we've found resilience gaps, I suppose, within ourselves because the world of work has changed a lot in the last 5 years. And we need to look at, what's driving that change because we need to be not just adaptable, that we can bounce back when we hit obstacles along the way, but we want to be also adaptive. So we want to design our careers in such a way that they're able for those ups and downs, okay? So anybody recognize either of these two gentlemen here, guys? Any guesses for me? So one has a Cork connection. The chap on the left is Henry Ford. And Henry Ford is what I would call a T-shaped engineer. So what we're going to see is that careers are changing shape, actually, for good reason. And we're also going to see what T-shaped engineers are. And T-shaped engineers are, I suppose, one of the shapes that it's worth looking at designing your career around. And the chap on the right-hand side is Thomas Edison. Thomas Edison wasn't a T-shaped engineer, he was a scientist. But he holds, I suppose, some of the secrets to us or how we can make our careers resilient. So we're going to look at the why. So why do we need resilient careers? There's a number of reasons. We're all hearing about Industry 4.0, so we're well aware that manufacturing is becoming more automated and advanced, so there are implications for our careers of that. We're also seeing something called Employment 5.0. And Employment 5.0 is a little bit trickier to explain. I can nearly explain better what it isn't rather than what it is, so I'll do that. But Employment 5.0 isn't a point in time as much as it is a concept of what the future of work could look like. And it's not about what I suppose we can do with technology, which Industry 4.0 is focused on. It's more about what technology can do for us. And the world of work is going to change a lot in the next 10 years. It may even be unrecognizable in 10 years' time for many of us. So we need to prepare for that. And there are political, technological, and skills implications. And let's have a look at, what we can do to future-proof our career and our skills. We're going to look at how we do that. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to look at what are the shapes that both our careers need to take and also our skills need to take so that we can weather the changes of industry, as Shakespeare called it, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, because we don't know what's ahead. Okay, and it's changing very quickly. We're victims of our own success. The faster technology moves, the shorter our skills life cycles are. So for a software engineer at the moment, there is a 3-year life cycle to their skills. It means that 50% of what they know becomes obsolete in 3 years. So we're going to look at what can we do? What are the most important things we can do to have a resilient career? It's not actually about how smart we are necessarily or how hard we work. So we need to figure out what it is about. And then we're also going to look at who. We're going to take a few lessons from the likes of Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. Even Steve Jobs was a T-shaped engineer, but that doesn't mean that we should necessarily model our careers on him, because I suppose the closer you get to the top of organisations, the more exceptional people tend to be, and the less valid it is to model an average career on it. And ultimately, whether we like it or not, statistically, most of us are average. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. That's a plus. So let's take advantage of that. Let's look at what are the secret weapons we have as the average person or average engineer to carve out a lengthy career, because they will be lengthy. Careers are getting longer, even though life cycles are getting shorter, and that has implications too. So what and why, I suppose, what is Employment 5.0 and what does it address? Why do we need to prepare for it? First of all, the nature of jobs is changing. As I said, technology is moving a lot faster, so it's creating new types of jobs that we haven't seen before, sometimes called hybrid jobs or super jobs. And we need to prepare for that. Secondly, we're seeing as technology advances, the demand is there for more specialist skills, which is fine. But we also don't want to paint ourselves into a corner or be too narrowly defined, because that can hold us back later. And as I mentioned, skills cycles are getting shorter. So when we are skilled at something, it can count for less in terms of time. We need to be preparing for future skills readiness, not just the skills we have at the moment, but looking at, how do we build on those and upskill. We're also going to have a lot of data to deal with. The more we automate, the more data we're gathering, but data is a far way away from wisdom. So having more data won't necessarily help us to make better decisions, either in our manufacturing or our careers, so we need to cope with that. We're all knowledge workers if you're engineers, but it can be harder to work together because you're seeing each other less. Yes, we have hybrid work, that's one aspect of it. We're in the office less, and that's something to be managed. We can sometimes be more productive at home, but equally when we come onto sites now, if we're producing, for example, vaccines, we're protecting the product from us. We want less person contact with our products. And we're seeing more heavily engineered, I suppose, in high containment manufacturing, where it's kind of hard to see actually what the process is doing, except maybe on digital twins and based on models that we use. So industry is changing, as I said, which means jobs are changing, technology is moving our skills along very quickly, and work is just getting a little bit harder to judge. It's more abstract, it's more complex, and it's more dependent on interrelated systems. So it means a lot can fall between the cracks, and we can have a lot less person-to-person contact, which is fine maybe for a bit later in your career, where you already know how everything works, and the fact that it's now within an algorithm doesn't make a big deal because you knew the rationale for it in the first place. But if you're new to a career in engineering, it can be harder to get your head around what you're dealing with, in the same way that, Steve Jobs designed some beautiful products, but it's really hard to see how they're made. They're so well engineered that you don't see all the little fasteners that are behind the scenes, which makes it less likely that you'll try and understand how it works, and you're less able to repair it. So we're gaining mainly in data, but we might be losing in understanding. And that's important, because if we don't understand, we don't know why we're doing what we're doing, we can't learn, and we can't advance ourselves in our careers. So Henry Ford was pretty much the inventor of mass industrialization, and that was fantastic, because mass industrialization meant the average person could suddenly have a car, and it transformed how we lived and how we worked. But now we're looking at mass customization, particularly within the medical device sector. So even for somebody who's been working in med tech for the last 10 years, their industry is changing too, and it's demanding new skills and new ways of thinking. So the 4 Ps of medicine are prediction being number 1, which means we need to be able to second guess maybe how a process will react when we make changes, for example. And we have a lot more integration of pharma and med tech. So we've drug-eluting stents, we've drug-eluting contact lenses, and it can be harder to judge in advance what biological systems and what, I suppose, those integrated things can do. And we also have to integrate, most importantly, the technology with making good decisions. And they'll all often be around cost-benefit. And we have to do the same within our careers too. We'll talk about that in a few more minutes. We're also interested in preventing harm. So if you've worked in other manufacturing sectors and then you come into medical device for the first time, probably the biggest change, the biggest thing that you can do to prevent harm is to switch your mindset from just in time to just in case. And that means you make different decisions even with the same data. We're also going to see a lot more personalization. So now, even already, the orthopedics and the diagnostic sectors within the medtech are really customizing and personalizing devices. So you don't just go and have a replacement knee that's off the shelf. You go and have a replacement knee that has a certain serial number on it because it was designed exactly for you and it was finished exactly for you in a way that is best for your health outcome. It's all about managing risk. So as important as the technology is for an engineer working in medtech, managing the risk is possibly more important because patients need to be protected and they also hopefully need to be participative in how we design their products. All good design starts with empathy. So we not just need to understand our products from a technical point of view, we need to understand our products psychologically in terms of how a patient sees them. So what might make sense for us in manufacturing may not make sense for our patient. Here's an example. If we're automating and standardizing our manufacturing processes, it makes sense for this company to do what they did, which was to standardize their packaging. But it doesn't make as much sense for the patient, so they had to switch back to the old packaging. Because the patient who's going to be taking all of this medication is most likely to be an elderly patient. And it causes problems and it causes discomfort for an elderly patient to be faced with medication that all has the same packaging. Because, if you think about it, they're more likely to drop a tablet and they're less likely to know which tablet they dropped, for example. And they also become quite emotionally attached to the packaging. That's why people are very slow to change generic products, even though the active pharmaceutical ingredient is exactly the same. So we can learn from all of this, because if you're interested in medtech or pharma sectors, you're also interested in how they think. And one of the ways that we can, I suppose, prevent errors, both in manufacturing and within our careers as engineers, is to apply the same logic we do for manufacturing to how we manage our careers. So we make sure, and we've a better chance of doing well if, for instance, we go to interview and we actually prove that what's on our CV is valid, for example. Okay, so we show that we don't just say we do something, we can actually give evidence to prove that we do. And we can put controls in place and we can keep an eye out for the little feedback loops that matter within our own careers, just the same way we manage all those and control those kind of parameters in manufacturing a product. So we can look at ourselves as a process and activity. That's what our career is. We want to plan it. We want to, sometimes do little experiments to make sure we're right about our plans, etc. So we want to plan, do, check and act on our careers as well. And where we start is, what are the main inputs? We know, for example, that the skills we need to develop are taking new shapes. So we want to look at that today. We want to look at the careers that we're likely to take. Linear career paths and jobs for life don't exist anymore, or if they do, they won't necessarily get us the return that we want. So we're more likely to see non-traditional career shapes. So people taking different pivots within their careers, people multi-tracking. So you might have an equipment engineer who's also pursuing a project management diploma, for example, and starting to manage projects. We might see people second careering. So it doesn't mean just because you're in an arts degree now that you couldn't be an engineer in 10 years' time. You might come in and work in a particular area like cyber surveillance and then do a micro-credential and develop your level A qualification from there. So that's what the company I work for, that's what we do. We identify and develop talent within engineering. And it's not always the engineers who have the good technical talent. So we recognize talent too, and we develop outskilled pathways. But for everybody, what we're trying to do is help you be more data literate, because as I said, there's a tsunami of data coming our way. And also that you're digitally ready as learners and workers for what's coming ahead. So we need to look at learning in a new way too. So there's a lot for us to learn and unlearn even about learning itself. Sorry, did I skip something there? Okay, so one of the things we need to learn about learning is just how much more autonomous we will need to be as learners. If we want to understand any activity well, a process, etc., we need to understand its what, how, why, and who, and the same applies for learning. So it'll really be up to us a lot of the time as workers to identify what are the learning choices we want to make and then encourage our employers to support those. And the type of learning that we're engaged in at the Engineering Skillnet is what we call high-impact learning. And it's a different approach where we really integrate well the type of learning that people do with the job they're doing at the time. You don't go on a course that isn't in some way integrated into the kind of projects you're working on. Your manager's involved in not just sending you on a course and paying for it, but also they're there to learn too from you when you return. So there's a lot more kind of demonstrations involved, a lot more safe places for you to practice those skills, and maybe even stop halfway through a course, practice the skills, maybe it's PLC or maybe it's troubleshooting, and then return to the course 6 months later. So a lot of ways of blended learning, structured versus unstructured, of having virtual self-paced learning, but also learning that's on the floor within the company you're in, and giving you a lot more choice, I suppose, around when and how you learn. And, that puts the onus on the person to understand their learning preferences and their learning styles, but assessment by learning is also a good way because it tests us along the way. It builds in that check facility. So the courses that you should choose to do are the ones that are well integrated into the work that you do, that have lots of self-assessments throughout, that allow you to pace yourself to and return to courses later if you wish. Lots of good entry points and exit points that you don't have to commit to something for 2 years. You can do little micro courses that are still certified and build on those over time. So these are all options that are available. This is a new course that we'll have ready by June. It's a diploma in quality technology that'll give people a very good standing and foundation in, for instance, the science of risk, which is statistics. And you need to make a start somewhere if you want to work in a data-rich environment with statistics, and that's a great entry point there. So as I said, we're looking at broadening the skills of engineers so they become more data literate. Within engineering, most people specialise, early enough in their careers within a particular discipline. But it isn't enough for the future of work. We will also need to have what we call good transversal or horizontal skills. And they're the skills that help us join the dots well. So, for example, if you're going into, if you're a great engineer and you've been promoted, great news, try and make sure that you get some sort of training for people management, project management. You improve your communication skills before you go into your next role. And I'll explain why in a few minutes. So, as I said, Henry Ford was one of our T-shaped engineers. And what he was good at was combining engineering and cost control. And he was also good from the point of view of understanding the importance of certain critical skills that we do need to work hard on. Just as much as we would, technical knowledge, we need to work on skills like problem solving, critical thinking, etc. And he, I suppose, also understood that, one way or the other, no matter how automated things will become, we're dependent on human beings to make the important decisions. And he was the automotive industry was one of the first to start to professionalize good problem solving and structured approaches. But it's also important that we understand where these thinking tools come from, because that's what they are. And if you're coming from automotive into med tech, you've probably got some of the great thinking tools and techniques that will serve you well. But you mightn't always know what the basis for them is. And it's important to know that so that you know when to apply them. You don't fit so much, I suppose, the problem to the thinking tool as vice versa, and you pick fit-for-purpose ones. So there are fit-for-purpose skills called transversal skills, and they are called that because they transfer well across sectors, across projects, and across jobs and tasks. And according to the World Economic Forum, these are what we should be most looking to develop within our engineers. So the courses that we develop are targeting these. Sometimes they're very short courses. You might come on for 3 weeks or 5 weeks or 2 days or a morning workshop, but the workshop will be intended to develop various skills. I'll give you an example. One is critical thinking. So we're going way back further than Henry Ford, and we're going back to where a lot of our thinking tools came from in the first place. So if you're working and you've used the 5 method, that came from Socrates. So it has a really ancient, I suppose, tradition around knowledge that we're borrowing from within industry today. Plato gave us some good lessons. He said, what you see is not all there is. So no matter how much data we have, it isn't going to substitute for good critical thinking. And Aristotle was the first to give us form, fit, and function, and the notion of designing actually for a person at the end of the day. So the great traditions that we have within industry, sometimes we're not even aware of them, but it's good to be reminded, because regardless of how good, as I said, our thinking tools are, our Lean and Six Sigma tools, our quality systems, they're never going to be a substitute for us thinking well and facing what are often novel problems that we haven't seen before. We also need to improve our design thinking, because we'll need to be entrepreneurial, and we'll need to make sure that the systems that we develop are fit for purpose. And sometimes that old thinking that created the systems in the first place isn't the same thinking that's going to help us solve new problems. So this is a course that we have over 5 weeks. On the face of it, it'll help you to develop your 3D printing skills using either SolidWorks or Autodesk Inventor, but it'll also help you to discover how do you bring an idea right through from the concept stage to actually printing it off as a prototype or a part. So my email address is there, guys. If any of you want to contact me about any of these courses or just to talk about your career in general, take the email address, email me. I'm happy to talk to you. We have 150 companies that are members. They invest in these courses. Sometimes I can throw a few people on for free. So if I'm in touch with you, then I'll know what you're interested in doing, and I might be able to offer you some of those. So this is where we're going. T-shaped engineers is just the beginning, actually. We also want to help people who want to multi-track, as I said, their careers, who want to pursue careers in maybe 2 fields at once, and who want to develop really versatile skills. So like our comb-shaped or M-shaped engineers, we want people who are good maybe on electrical, mechanical and electronic systems, because we'll have less people on the manufacturing floor, which means we also need those less people to be able to do more. So you'll be continuously learning in order to keep your career resilient, and we can certainly help you to do that. So this is what careers used to look like. This is your linear career. And a linear career, I suppose, was where we came in as an engineer and we aimed to climb up that corporate ladder and get to the top of the engineering department. And, the problem with it, however, is, number one, even if we are promoted, we aren't always promoted for the right reasons or with the right set of skills. And there's something called the Peter Principle, where yes, you're promoted, but you're promoted to your level of incompetence. So if you feel you want to be promoted, what you really need to do is invest in the skill for people management and project management ahead of time, not find yourself in a role where suddenly you're being a technical expert or very good technically is irrelevant because you can't communicate well. And the other problem, I suppose, with that kind of expectation around a career is that it's just not realistic anymore, because at the pace companies are changing, the very skills you're trying to develop might sit within a totally different department. We can see, for instance, maintenance of advanced manufacturing sectors. Maintenance is moving right out of facilities, and it could be, you could have maintenance people located in operations and engineering or lots of other departments now. So if it's not realistic, well, what is? Well, this is really what a more realistic career would look like, where you're not necessarily climbing, and taking, I suppose, each step one at a time at the same pace and in the same direction every year. And, the problem, I suppose, with the straight line, linear approach too is that you tend to just see your jobs then as a stepping stone to the next job. And in that is a problem. Because if your job is just the stepping stone to the next one, you're inclined to underinvest in that job. And as a result, you underperform, and as a result, you don't climb the corporate ladder. Whereas on the right, you're more adept at switching gear, at pivoting between different opportunities with the goal of learning, which means sometimes you might take a step back and take a more junior role and dial down your career if that suited you better. So we often talk about grit being important, and working hard is important. But it's not the only thing. If you're working hard to do the wrong thing better, there is no point. So really what we need to do is, if we're working hard, make sure we're doing a cost-benefit analysis, that we know we're working hard at something that's actually worthwhile. Sometimes it is better to quit. And quit while you're ahead, is a saying for a reason. If you switch gear and sometimes even second track your career, you might just be learning more as it happens. And really that's what the key is understanding the style that you have for learning, that it has to be a continuous process, and understanding the type of learning that suits you best and where you can find that. So this is an example of our multi-track careers that we support for maintenance staff, where people can do any of these 8 modules in any order. They're all working up to a level 6 diploma, and they're all very hands-on, problem-based. And we use mobile training kits to go out to companies and deliver that training. So if you're mechanical, but you want to get your first introduction into PLC or into automation controls, this course might be for you, so definitely contact me if that's the case. So the other thing we need to realise is, learning isn't easy, because to learn means you're putting yourself in a discomfort zone. But both Henry Ford and Thomas Edison understood that that's valuable. So if you have failed at an interview recently, or you went for a promotion and didn't get it, or nobody's coming back to you on your CV, actually all of those things are good learning opportunities too. In fact, we can learn more when we don't do well rather than do well. And that learning can be far more durable, and that's because of something called cognition and how our brains work. So as I said before, if you see your job as not being that meaningful, well, then it isn't. If you think you can't do something or you can do it, as Henry Ford would say, you're right. And the reason for this is most of what makes our work meaningful is really the stories we tell about our career. And that's what has been looked for at interview, is have you reflected enough to know and understand why you believe what you believe about your job and why it's useful, and also what you learned. And if you look at just how the brain operates, we're always telling stories to ourselves. That's when we're most engaged. So when you go for interview, that's what you're there to do is, prove based on your examples that you give from your experience, etc. So I'm going to speed up a bit because I know I don't have too much time. I've been given the signal. So believing in yourself and the story you tell about yourself at interview is one of the most important things you'll do in your career. When we look at really the difference between high performers and low performance, it's not what's on the left-hand side that's important. Because if you're an engineer in the first place, much of your education background is probably quite similar. Where it gets much more interesting is where are the resilience gaps, for example, between how ambitious you are and your expectations, because there's a big difference. Expectations are about what we sort of, I'll start with ambition. Ambition is about what we think we're entitled to and what our goals are that we're set for our career. They may or may not be grounded in reality. But expectations are different. Expectations are about both what we expect and what we expect to have to do, and if we think there's a link there between knowing that what we expect to do and have to do is going to guarantee that we achieve our expectations. So a lot of that is around what we believe we're capable of. And actually, there isn't a great degree of alignment between people's expectations of themselves and what they are capable of. Some people really underestimate themselves and others overestimate themselves. And based on that, we make career decisions that are either really useful or really not, effective for us. So those choices are key. And as I said, if you're making those choices, make sure you do it on a risk-based strategy of understanding what are both the costs and benefits. For some people, it is worth sticking with a particular plan, for a number of years. And for somebody else, it isn't, because their interest is no longer, within that particular field. So the other piece that's important, apart from how much we believe in our own abilities, is our learner agency. So how well we understand the who, what, how, and why of learning itself. Edison wasn't actually a very good student. In fact, he was a poor student. But he was a fantastic learner because he was willing to put himself in a situation where he didn't know everything that he needed to know. But he was still willing to experiment, to go out, ask questions, and able to use, I suppose, one of our most important tools for our careers. It's not a solo mission. It's very much a team sport. Engineers learn best and most effectively actually together and from one another. And that includes seeing each other succeed and fail. So again, Go to the companies where you realize there's people, not necessarily experts, that you can learn from, because we don't learn that effectively from experts necessarily. Who we learn most effectively from are people who are our peers but slightly ahead of us or slightly better than us. And we learn best when we're in a situation where we all need to depend on each other to learn. So look for learning experiences that give you that kind of collective experience where you see other people learning. You see them sometimes making mistakes is very useful to you too. And also you get to do what's called problem-based learning. So rather than learning just the theory, where you get to practice the skills and see how good you are or not. And they're the kind of plan, do, check, act mechanisms you can build into your CV. So pick your learning choices carefully. Because ultimately it's what your purpose is, and I suppose identifying what your purpose is in the first place. This is the same kind of model that we might use within medical device and pharma to understand our processes, our manufacturing processes, except in the middle would be the patient. Otherwise, the rest is the same. It's about asking questions and understanding what's critical to us, what are, I suppose, our constraints, because we're all average people, we've strengths and weaknesses. It's really about knowing what those are, knowing what our conditions are for success, because everybody's definition of success is slightly different, or at least it should be, and we don't know that unless we challenge ourselves and ask questions. And if we're really good at learning, then we become a little bit like the O'Donovan brothers, who are our rowing Olympic heroes here in Ireland. And the reason why they stand out for me is because they looked at their, I suppose, job of being a champion rower in a totally different way than other sports people tended to look at what they did. First of all, they were very inventive around how they needed to train. And they didn't go for what the standard things were. When they went to the Olympics and COVID had hit, they set up and simulated a little training system for themselves within a shower room. So they had the heat and temperature that simulated the environment they'd be in. They also reinvented completely the sports interview. There was no more platitudes or cliches involved. And they reinvented what it meant to win in the first place for them. It was no longer about medals or beating the competition. It was about beating themselves, okay, and doing their personal best. So that is that's called triple loop learning, and that's the learning that really helps us to be resilient, and not just resilient in our careers, but robust. And it takes a lot of honesty with yourself, to define your own career success, not have somebody else tell you what that is. One other thing that's really hard is, tackling the skills that we're weakest at first, what we call eating the frog. For many people, standing up and presenting like this is the most daunting thing they'll have to do as engineers. So just get onto a course and master it in a safe to fail setting. So we can give you links to trainers who can do that for you. And then we can give you links to trainers who can help you leapfrog, which is what you need to do in your career, but it's also what we need to do sometimes to solve problems. So we need to change our thinking toolkit a little bit. And we need to be able to invert problems and make new associations. So these are all the kind of courses that we're offering, and they use our secret weapons. So the more we learn about machine learning, the more we learn about human learning. And we've realized that human intelligence is still superior for the moment to artificial intelligence for 3 reasons. Number 1, we can generate new questions. And machines can't do that at the moment. Secondly, we can talk to one another. And you and I can come with different understandings and different expectations, but we can achieve brand new insights that none of us would have come across on our own. And thirdly, we're able to reflect on ourselves, and computers can't do that yet. So we can still learn a lot, from machine learning to improve our own learning, so we can learn faster, and if we accelerate how we learn, we accelerate our careers. And it's less about grit and working really hard or quit, and it's more about what the ant colony does. It's explore and exploit. So when should we be exploring new fields, learning new skills, and when should we be exploiting them? And that's not always what you'd expect. Sometimes we can exploit by going into an adjacent sector rather than staying in the sector we're in at the moment. So we're going from the Model T Ford to T-car cells within cancer treatment. If you're an engineer, you need to just become more science curious, because engineering is becoming more scientific. And scientists, if I was doing a talk to scientists, by the way, I'd tell them that they need to think more like engineers, so I'm not being biased here in any way. But we also need to know more about data. So a really good place to start is understanding models. okay? Models are just a representation of reality. Some are useful, some aren't. But we still need to understand the principles behind them as engineers now, because we're going to be dealing with more data and more modelling one way or the other. And we also need to be more curious about ourselves and ask ourselves questions even when our careers are going well. And sometimes have a coach, not just because you have to have one because something happened you didn't want to happen, you were made redundant or something, but a coach just to keep you honest and keep you on track as regards, reaching your own goals. And always be curious about what you can't do yet, because we are all a work in progress and we're all just learning, and it's now a lifelong game. So by all means, email me if anything here caught your eye, or you want a bit more information about the courses we offer, or you want me to talk to your learning and development departments to make sure they invest in the right learning for you, or you're looking for a job. By all means, send me an email. I'm really happy to give you career advice. I worked in recruitment for 20 years, so hopefully it's worth something to you now. So look forward to hearing from you guys. And best of luck. Enjoy Galway today, and come and talk to me anytime.